2004. My name is Carol Darla. I'm at the home of Sheiba Haight on the north end of Higgins Lake. And we're here today to get her family history and have her help us with the early history of Higgins Lake. Thank you. Okay, we'll just get started, Sheiba. Let's start with your parents and when they came to this area.
Mm.
First of all, what were their names?
My dad's name was William Aubrey,
A-U-B
R-E-Y.
R-E-Y.
My mother's name was Susie Wargo. And my dad came here, I don't know.
Approximately?
I really couldn't even approximate. My sister was born in 1918, so he came before that.
Did he come as a single man?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes. And
Where was he born?
Pennsylvania, Erie, Pennsylvania.
How did he get to come here?
I really have no idea why he came to Michigan. I think his sister might have moved here.
Oh.
And they lived in Roscommon at one time in that yellow house back of, I guess it's still yellow. Kylie's lived in it at one time. Back of, I think it's still standing. Oh, shoot. It's on the back street back of the Glenn's Market.
Oh, on 4th Street?
Yeah, I don't know the names of the street. But anyhow.
Well, Glenn's is on 5th, so it wasn't
Yeah.
before.
So.
What was his sister's name?
Haight.
Hyner?
Uh-huh.
H-E-I?
H-Y-N-E-R.
Okay.
That was her married name.
Yeah.
And Vera is her name. And my mother came as a young girl. I know she couldn't have been more than 17 or 18 because my family moved here from Ohio. My grandparents and my uncles worked in the coal mines. And then Les Helen had this big splurge in the paper. You can grow potatoes the size of whatever, in the
They
good.
worked in coal mines in Ohio?
Ohio and Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
And then Les Helen, everybody's heard of Les Helen, I'm sure.
Well, I haven't, so let's
Oh, you haven't?
who Les Helen is.
Well, all that property on the west side of the lake, a lot of that property on the west side of the lake was sold by Les Helen from Chicago.
Okay.
And he
But
had
he
this.
didn't live here?
No, he lived in Chicago. He had this big blurb in the papers about what good farmland it was and all this. So my grandfather, my grandmother was dead by then, had decided to move here with my uncle and aunt and my mother.
Mr. Wargo, what was his
What?
first name?
Michael, I think.
Michael.
My uncle's name was Michael also, but his name was Michael too. And they lived over on Murphy Road. Murphy Road, and what's that other one that would run, that Willits used to live on? You would
Robinson
turn.
Lake Road.
Yeah, they lived on the corner of Murphy Road and Robinson Road. There was a house. Don't know who owns it now.
Mm.
It was sold when my uncle moved in with me, and.
But that's the house that your grandparents went to, so your mother went there as a
Mhm.
young girl, that's where she lived.
Yeah, they built the house, I believe.
Okay.
And she went there as a young girl, and holy fright. Let me unhook this thing for just
Okay.
a minute. Come here in the hundreds, somewhere around the 1912, 1910, somewhere around in there, because of the ad in the paper about how good farming, how good farming is here.
How much land did your father have, do you think, that he
think
tried
he-
to farm?
It's my
Or
grandfather.
your grandfather, I mean?
I think he had 40 acres there. Or was it 80? Must have been 80 acres. When you're a kid, you don't pay any attention to this
no, you
stuff,
sure don't.
And when we would go there to visit, if they wanted to tell something that they didn't want us kids to know, they'd talk in Slavish.
So what country were they from?
Well,
Czechoslovakia, you think?
it's one of those countries that now does no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
It was Slovak or something, but it was around the Czechoslovakia. It was one of those countries that is been absorbed with another country.
Sure.
And my uncle and grandfather came from there. My mother and my aunts, two aunts, were born in this country,
In Pennsylvania.
in Pennsylvania.
So if they had just, how many children did they have then?
They had four.
4.
Mm-hmm.
So only the first one was born over there in the 3.
Three were
Yeah.
born here.
Okay. So they came here with a young family.
Mm-hmm. See, my grandmother died when my mother was 12. So she must have come with them too.
What year would your mother have been born?
Let's see, 1898.
Yeah, she was like 26 when you were born. Is that about right?
Yeah, let's see. She's been gone. Oh, 88. She's been gone 16 years, and she was 93 when she died.
She died in 1988.
And she was 93.
She was born in 1895.
95, okay. I knew it was 90 something.
Yeah. So did she live all her life after did they stay here then?
Mm-hmm.
Your mother and dad?
See, my father, when he came here, I don't know what he did, but he worked for Andy Price in his store
Oh.
as a young man, single man.
Uh-huh.
And then after, I guess, when they were married, then the state, he got the job as the forestry on the Higgins Lake Forestry as a custodian there, as a forester or whatever they called him.
You think that he had that job before they were married?
No, after they were married,
Okay.
because my sister was 3 years old when they moved there.
Oh, okay.
And we had a big cement block house there.
Oh, now where's there exactly? Where the North Bay Park is
Yeah.
right now?
Where this oak tree is, the
Mhm.
house set over in here.
Okay.
And this is where lightning struck that birch.
Oh, wow. And that oak tree is
Still
if I
there.
walk there today. Where would I go into the North Bay Park to find it?
You go down toward the school, conservation
Oh,
school,
okay.
and it should be right. I think it's still there. I'm sure.
The cement block house that you lived in,
It's gone.
that's gone.
They tore it down,
Oh, okay.
and that hedge that's there, my father built or planted.
What kind of hedge?
The hedge that goes to the lake.
Oh,
No, it's a pine hedge. Yeah.
pine.
Yeah, my father planted it when my sister was young, my other sister, so it's,
Okay, let's get you and your 2 sisters' dates.
my other sister was, let's see, what did we say Nancy was born in?
I didn't get their names. Nancy?
Mm-hmm. And Betty.
Oh, okay.
Marguerite Elizabeth, but nobody know who you were talking about.
Betty's Marguerite Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm. He's after the squirrels.
Oh, I imagine. So you were the youngest?
Uh-huh.
Okay, and you said Nancy was born in 1918,
16.
16.
And so Betty was born in 1918,
Oh,
and I was born in 1923.
and you all grew up here
Mhm.
on the lake. Weren't you special old children?
We were very fortunate, very fortunate. That's what makes me sick when I go to the lake today.
Oh, I bet it does.
Because when I was a kid, you could throw a dime in 30 feet of water and still see it. You know, and when it got rough, the lake in by shore never got riled up like it is today. And I didn't realize there was clay in that lake until a few years ago. But these boats are really tearing it up. And it's still a beautiful lake, but I don't know what it's going to be like in 100 years from now.
Nothing like it was. Well, let's get back to now, was your father came, how did he happen to come to Roscommon? It was your mother's family that came to farm.
Hmm.
What about his family?
Well, he came because I think my aunt moved here.
His sister.
And my grandfather came with them.
Okay, what were their names?
Well,
His
Heiner was
sister
my,
Vera Heiner.
yeah, and of course my grandpa's name was Aubrey. What was his first name? He was a Civil War vet, had one arm. I gave a lot of my pictures to my niece. She was going to do a collage of the family at one time, and she never got around to doing it. And so she still has a bunch of my pictures.
Did they have a big family? Was your father from a big family?
No.
Or just
Mm-mm.
he and Vera?
And he had a stepbrother.
Oh, okay. Did the mother come also? The grandma, Aubrey?
She died young, and when Aunt Vera and my dad were small,
Oh.
and my grandpa remarried a witch.
That often happens.
Well, she sent the kids to military school.
Just to
Mm-hmm.
got them out of the house.
Yep. And she, according to my
And
father,
she had this other child.
then my grandfather and her had this child
So
together.
it was a half
Half-brother. I
brother.
said stepbrother,
Yeah.
but it was half-brother. According to my father, she was a witch, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And but I have no idea how kids' minds work, you
Yeah,
know.
that's right.
I know my father taught school,
Oh.
and he only had a 7th grade education, but in those
Wow.
days, you know,
Where did he teach?
out in Pennsylvania,
Oh,
before he came here.
okay. He came to Roscommon in 1912. So
Yeah, he was a young man.
he
Well,
was
see, he was,
probably 20 or so.
yeah, because he was quite a bit older than my mother.
Okay.
And I wished I could find that darn stuff. Because I had the dates down there, and I can't remember from nothing. The only reason I remember when my mother died so vividly, it was on the 4th of July. Well, it was on the 2nd, but it was that weekend, and Glenn had just moved into his new house, and so all those things put together,
Mm-hmm.
I can remember 88, but other than that, I have to stop and think from the year that Earl died, you know?
Sure you do.
It-
Well, we all do that. We have
It's,
certain, like reference points that you
Mhm.
go from. So your father came here and then had a job with the state. You said he started out as a custodian?
No, as a superintendent of the forestry.
Okay, so he started out right at the top.
Mm-hmm. And I worked for Andy Price first in the store. And then he started, and he was also a surveyor.
Oh, okay.
And
Was he self-taught or was he
yeah,
registered? or
nope. In those days, you weren't.
Just did it.
You picked up a transit, and he was a very smart man. It's too bad I didn't take after him. My other two
Oh.
sisters did, but
Well, I don't know about that.
I didn't. Yes, in fact, he surveyed a lot of land.
Really?
Yeah, and
Always for the state or
for
did
the
he have
state.
a
No,
side
just for
job
this.
of his own?
No, just for the
Just surveying
state.
for the
Yeah.
state.
Hmm. And in those days, we had a crew. They had a crew of workers,
Mhm.
and the bunkhouses. I think there's a bunkhouse over in the nursery, if I'm not mistaken.
That they built for some of those workers?
There was the nursery workers and the forestry workers. There was two of them just right across the road from here, were the bunkhouses.
Oh,
And one was for the nursery workers, and the other was for the forestry workers.
so they were two different groups.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, Ed Zettel was the superintendent of the nursery. My father at one time was superintendent of both the nursery and the forestry. And
Were they both state agencies?
mm-hmm.
Okay, none of it was federal or
No,
anything else?
always
Oh.
state, yeah. And So then they decided that was too much for one man, so Ed, I don't know how he got the job, but anyhow, he got the job at the nursery.
So there was a forestry division and a nursery division. Okay, so the whole purpose of this was to get these seedlings to reforest the whole state of Michigan, or what?
Yeah, pretty much the whole state. The nursery would raise the trees, and then the forestry would take the seedlings or the trees out and plant. And the Detroit News at one time did a lot of reforestation up here.
Oh,
And
and they paid for it?
they groups, garden groups, and those things would donate I don't know, section
Uh-huh.
to reforestation,
Oh, okay.
because there was a big fire went through at one time. And so the Detroit News covered all of that, and I'm sure more pictures than this. I know I do someplace.
Well, you might come across it, yeah. Maybe we
And
could get copies of it when you do come across it.
yeah, and the governors, they used to have their meetings at the forestry headquarters here. You know, like Marcus Schaff, who was the head down in Lansing, and all those, what do you call them, the commissioners. And the governors would come. And I had a very
So it was a big...
I had a very privileged childhood, now that I look back on it.
Sure.
Governor Green was a special friend of mine. He used to call me Buttons.
No kidding.
And, which you don't, he was just another man as far as I was
Now,
concerned.
he's mentioned with the Galmer House that he had come, when he was in town, he would come there for dinner.
Probably.
At noon time.
And
And also at the Spruce, I think he was a guest.
probably, he was here quite a bit.
Sounds like.
I was about 6
Really.
when the picture that I have was taken with us. And
So getting back to this forestry and nursery thing that your father was in charge of, did they just hire like college kids in the summertime, or were these
Mm-mm.
men that were employed?
George
year-round?
Ostling worked for them.
So that was a year-round
Yeah,
employment
uh-huh.
for these men.
Yeah, George Ostling and Goodnight. I don't know if Arv did or not. But somebody by the name of Carlson. Porter Royce, I think. And I can't remember who all.
Any other- yeah.
And my mother we had what was called the big dining room. They added on this big room.
Onto the cement block house.
Yeah,
that
and
had
that
the
was,
belt.
we called it the big dining room, and that's where my mother cooked for about 30 men.
How
Would,
often? Daily?
every day. They
No
would have
kidding.
breakfast, and then she'd pack their lunches, and they'd go out and,
Was someone paying her, I hope?
no, this was part of her job.
Well, that wouldn't be that way today, would it?
Uh-uh, no.
Isn't that something?
Well, they paid for the food,
Sure.
but, and then at night, they'd have supper, and she had a chore boy, but that was it. She did all the cooking, most of the cooking herself. And at one time, she had a helper. But,
Was that still going on when you were a teenager? Did you have to help with that?
oh no, that was all done with by the
So
time.
how many years do you think that this went on?
Ooh, till the CCCs came in, I believe,
And that was in the
1930s.
So when the CCC group came, did they just take over this whole operation?
They pretty much did the reforestation and that sort of thing. My father and Ed worked with them.
So your father and Ed still were employed by the state?
Oh yeah,
to supervise all this?
My father was superintendent until he died.
And what year was that?
I was 16, so 1939,
Yeah.
November 1939.
Then what happened to that job?
A man by the name of Borgeson came in. You remember Borges? You don't? Anyhow, a man by the name of Borgeson came in and took it over.
Did
And
he
I don't
have
really
to
know
re-
what he did. Yeah, we had
That
to
house
move.
then?
Uh-huh.
Then where did your family go?
Well, I moved to town with my sister for a while,
Which sister?
Nancy.
Okay.
She lived in town because
Was she
my
married by then?
yeah, my brother-in-law worked for the CCCs.
Who was she married to?
Francis Hyde,
Oh.
Hyde. Uh, and he worked for the draftsman for the CCs out here at Camp Higgins Lake camp out here. And then when the CCCs folded, he moved to Lansing.
Which was when was that? How
Oh,
long
in
was it?
41, I believe.
So it was out here about 11 years?
Yeah, and then I went to Lansing to live with her for 6 months, and I couldn't stand, or not even that, I couldn't stand it any longer.
You were like 18, you were out of high school by
Oh,
then.
no. I was only 16.
41. So once 39 they went down there.
Yeah, and my homeroom went from A to H. Coming from a small town who had 90 kids in the whole high school, I stuck it out for one semester and I came home. I couldn't stand it.
Oh, bless your heart.
And I didn't know anybody, and you don't get to meet them when you're in high school because they've already formed their friendships.
Sure.
And I knew one girl, but that was it. And only because at one time she had gone to school up here for a short period.
Oh.
And
She's
so
been in your shoes.
when I came home, I went to live with Mrs. Beatway at the restaurant. She owned the restaurant.
Which restaurant?
It's where the Ace Hardware, that in between the bank or in between the school or the old school building or office,
It used- along
and
the
Ace
one? Used to be
Ace
called
Hardware, the white, what was it called? Anyhow, it was a restaurant. And Art Cornelia had a bakery in there at one time.
The same time that you...
No, after.
Oh, afterwards.
So I lived with
Who
Mrs.
was the lady you worked that owned
Mrs.
it?
Beatway. George and Alma Beatway owned the restaurant, and this was when I was a senior in high school.
So that was 1939 or 40.
41, because I graduated in 42. So I came home and worked for Ma Beatway.
And lived with...
Lived with her.
Right up above the park.
Up the restaurant.
What, you know who else referred to that was Lillian Higgins, that her parents owned it at night.
Yeah,
Was that after Beatways then, or
I think it was probably before.
before Beatways?
I think.
Okay.
I really only remember Ma Beatway, because I know I was serving soup to Holly Geist when World War II was declared.
Oh, I bet you sure would remember that, wouldn't you?
And
Who was Holly Geist?
one of the teachers here.
Oh, okay. Huh.
And the teachers used to eat there quite a bit, most of them.
Did they actually leave the school at lunchtime and come down there?
No, this was at night.
Oh, supper time.
Yeah, supper time. See, Earl was my chemistry teacher when I was a senior in high school.
Mm-hmm. Like John Long.
No, he went. I graduated and went to work in the bomber plant. Biggest mistake of my life
Where was that?
in Ypsilanti. My mother was working for a lady in East Lansing, and I could have gone and lived there for nothing and gone to Michigan State.
Oh.
But I didn't have anybody to push me. And it was too big at that. Even then it was too big for me to tackle. So I went to work and made this big money. Ha.
How did you, did someone go with you, or did you just, were there ads in the paper about these jobs? Or how did
See
that
how,
happen?
well, how did I get tangled up with, I guess we were looking for a job.
You
Oh, I
graduated-
probably,
you
Dorothy Pavick was going to school in Ypsilanti at that time.
Okay,
and-
she graduated with you in 42?
Mhm. And I went down to visit with her, and we roomed together for a while at this lady's, Mrs. Pook, and her husband had a dry cleaning thing. And the funny, Dorothy and I had to can peaches for her one time, because she wouldn't can them because she was having her period, and if she canned them when she was having her whoops,
That's interesting. Okay,
her
go ahead.
period, they'd all spoil.
Oh, don't you love it?
And they were Jewish, but she put that Christmas tree right in the middle of the window. She said, "How can I tell this 3-year-old kid he's a Jew and he can't have a Christmas tree when everybody else in the neighborhood's got one?"
Oh, bless her heart.
And so then,
So
what,
how long did you do that?
3 years.
3 years? You stayed down until the war ended then?
I came home.
42 to 45?
Yeah, I came home at 45, I think.
Then when you came home, where did you live?
Mother built this house when I was 16,
Oh, okay.
after my father died.
Okay.
She built this house. And of course, then it was just this part right here.
Oh,
That's been added on, and that was added on.
okay. Well, how did she get to Lansing then during the war? Just because she had to find
A job. She had to get a job, yeah. And my sister at that time was in Lansing. So that's how she ended up in
She
Lansing.
could stay at Lansing.
Yeah, and so she found this job as a housekeeper, and the lady had 2 little kids,
Great.
and they treated her just like one of the family.
Well, that was nice.
And they treated me like one of the family. And their names were Port. He had something to do with the government, Michigan. I think he was a lobbyist, if I'm not mistaken.
So
Yeah.
how long did she do that, your mother?
She worked for them 4 or 5 years, please.
Would she come up here then periodically to this house?
No. Mm-mm.
Did
She
she
stayed-
rent this out while she was down there?
We rented it once, and they about ruined it, and left owing rent and stuff, and so, let me see, why did she come home? Geez, Carol, you're making me think, and I can't think.
That's okay. Well, it's interesting how people had to react to the war and do what they had to do.
I guess she came home to help me with the
She
kids.
was a relatively young widow.
Yeah, 48 when my father died.
Yeah,
See, he was 18 years older than she was.
18 years old. That tells us when he was born. Out. Oh, well, that is something. So, how much land did your mother? Did she
She
have to
had-
buy this from the state then, or how did
No,
that
the
happen?
state didn't own it. This was an original homestead,
Oh,
and she was only the third owner. The state, she paid $10 an acre for it. There was 80 acres here. The state said that was too much money, because my father, because he worked for the state, was one of these sticklers for the rules that he wouldn't buy anything like tax land on the lake, because you weren't supposed to do that when you worked for the state.
oh.
And my mother, when she bought this, she just went ahead and bought it on her own, paid $800 for it, and offered it to the state, but it was too much money. They wouldn't. But since then, they've bugged her, I don't know how many times, to buy it.
Do you still have the original 80 acres?
Yeah, well, my one sister, she gave 12 acres to, and my other sister, in the process of building houses, has built 1, 2, 3, 4 houses.
Here?
Yeah,
Oh,
on King Road.
okay.
All those, the original state house on King Road where Scots lived, that was my sister's, and then the next one was my sister's, and the next one's my sister's, and the next one was my sister's.
Who did she have build those houses?
My brother-in-law usually built them. He was a builder.
Which brother?
Betty.
Oh, who was she married to?
Samsel, Bill Samsel. Carolyn Mead is my niece.
Bill Sampson.
Sampsel. You know Carolyn Mead?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my niece.
She was their daughter?
Yeah, she was a Samsel. They had 6 kids. And
No, I had another question. I forgot what it was. Oh, who did she have build this house then?
my uncle and my brother-in-law,
Which uncle?
Uncle Mike.
The Michael Uncle Wargo.
Mm-hmm. And Roy Frazier.
Now, how was Fraser related?
He wasn't.
Oh,
Evelyn.
he was just
Evelyn.
husband?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was a friend
Okay.
before my father died. Evelyn at one time worked once in a while for my mother.
Oh.
And
In what capacity? To help her cook all that stuff, you mean?
Zena, the oldest daughter, Roy's daughter, was quite a headstrong kid. And I had a tricycle. And she was told, don't go down towards the pond, because the pond at that time was full. It's no longer
Where was
full.
the pond?
On the way down to the lake, there's
From
this,
your house?
from this house, there was the pond. And it's no longer full because they've taken the boards out. At one time, that's where they got the water. They pumped the water up to the hill.
For the seedlings?
Uh-huh.
Or-
And I always had running water.
Aren't you something?
Yes. Coal oil lamps, kerosene lamps, but running water.
Uh-huh.
And so she was told, don't run down that way because there's a hill, because there was a hill down to the pond. Well, she did, and she went in the pond.
Oh, my God.
Luckily, she screamed loud enough as going down the hill that they heard her and got her out before she drowned.
Was it that deep she could have drowned?
Oh, yeah,
Really?
yeah, and it was mucky,
Uh-huh.
And,
and did your bicycle get ruined?
nah,
Oh, good.
you dry it off, you know how it goes.
Oh.
But, and then in those days, there was this big barn on top of the hill because they had horses at one time.
The big barn on the state property.
Mm-hmm. On the hill over here, this across the road.
Okay.
On this hill, let me see, where would it be? Just this side of where the toilets are.
Okay.
And
Just east of the toilet.
and then down below was the what would I call it? A shed where they did horseshoeing and all that sort of stuff.
Little blacksmithing.
Yeah, and then we had a garage where they kept the hand manipulated pumps for forest fires.
Oh.
They were 10-gallon
That
cans.
was all near your house then?
Yeah,
That
it was
all behind the
within
house?
a.
Yeah.
If I could find that dumb picture, it would show, And then there's a little white building. I think they moved it over to the guy that took care of the horses lived in, and that was Williams, Ethel Borsman's father.
Okay.
And her name isn't Borsman now. What is it?
Her maiden name was Williams.
Mm-hmm. And I think they moved it over to there. They moved the ice house.
Is it part of the
I think, yeah.
museum complex
Mhm.
now, you mean?
And the ice house, they moved over there. We used to, they'd cut ice in the wintertime, and so we
The
always,
same man that worked for forestry did all that.
yeah. And when I think of how we used to go out and stand at the edge of the hole and look, I think, my God, if one of my kids had done that, I'd have had a stroke,
Yeah.
you
Just
know.
think how dangerous
But we
it
used
was.
to, in the summertime, when it got real hot, we'd go into the ice house and sit because it
Cool.
was nice and cool.
Sure.
Because of all the sawdust in there was wet, of course, almost, but the ice stayed all summer in big
And
blocks.
was that kind of underground or not? It was
No.
just a big house.
It's over in the museum.
Oh.
And
When was that barn taken down then?
when they
took the house down?
started the state park. See, when they originally had the park, my father started that park, and where the concession stand used to be the pump. And you could park on the lake shore then. You could camp on the lake shore. And some people from town kind of spoiled it. They'd come out and stay all summer long. They had a summer cottage,
Mm-hmm. What year did he start that?
Oh, goodness.
In the
I
20s,
was,
probably.
let's see. I can remember going down through the park one 4th of July, shooting firecrackers. Somebody told my dad somebody was shooting at night,
It was you.
and it was me, and I must have been 16.
So probably in the late 30s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I said, these
So when they started having campers come in, then was this just a sidelight of his forestation work, or did they actually have the state park as such?
they had a state park, and they had to get a permit to camp in there. But I think it was like for 2 weeks or something. But the people from town didn't pay attention to that. At one
Were you
time,
glad to have more children out there to play with, or were
Oh,
they
I-
a bother?
never saw any kids.
Oh, you didn't? Oh.
No, I never had any kids to play with except my cousins, my nieces rather. I never had any kids to play with when I was growing up.
Uh-huh.
Zettel kids, yeah, we had the Zettel kids, but that was it. And that's all they had too, was us. And my kids at least had their cousins, which wasn't money more than what I had really. And but what was nice is you could camp on the right on the water. The campsites were right there. So
What kind of boats did your family? How did you enjoy the lake? Did you have
I didn't have a boat.
not even a
Never
canoe?
had a boat. Nope.
No.
Nope. My there used to be a white building that sat maybe 50 feet from our house. That was the office. Marcus Schaff, who was the head forester from Lansing, that was his office. And then they moved it.
Shaft?
Schaff, Schaaf.
Oh,
Schaff.
okay.
And then they moved it to Grayling someplace before he went to Lansing. And so they used it, his family used it as a summer cottage.
Oh.
And he had twins, a boy and a girl, they were like 2 years older or 3 years older than I was. And they had a canoe. We'd get in that bloody canoe in the afternoon and decide we were going to paddle around the lake, you know. Well,
Sure.
it got dark before we ever got around the lake. Do you want some more coffee, Carol?
No, I had a little visitor.
Oh, aunt?
Oh, just
Oh, my house is full of those dumb things now. I don't know where they come from. Every once in a while I get them. And then now, pretty soon I'll
Part
get
of living in the woods, right?
pretty soon I'll get those piss ants, you know, those little ones you can hardly see. Oh. And so we'd get halfway around the lake and it'd get dark, so we'd go and have somebody come and get us.
So somebody had a motorboat to come
No,
get you
they-
by car? you
They'd be by car.
Okay.
They'd come and get us, and we'd beach the canoe, and the next morning we'd go back and finish.
Well, that was fun.
Oh, we had, I just, as I said, if I could have given my kids a half as good a childhood as I had.
Well, that's nice that you had such a nice time. So what was it like to go around the lake at that time? Were
There was hardly any cottages, lakeside in Cottage Grove and Pine Woods, of course. And,
that Westminster camp, was that there
yeah.
already?
and Flag Point had a few cottages.
And you would go up the whole lake?
Mhm.
You did the whole thing? No kidding.
And my father, this used to be known as the Cold Springs, because there was a flowing, and so every spring my father would go down and put a pipe in, and the people would come from all over the lake to get this water because it was so
For their drinking water?
for their drinking water, because it was so pure and so cold, and I don't know where that
But that was an artesian well then?
I don't know where that thing has disappeared to. There's one out from the park about up to my waist. There's I don't know what you call them, sinkhole, or when the sand bubbles up a spring,
Oh, sure.
And I always have been worried about that spring there, because I can go into it up to my waist and I don't touch bottom. Or at least I used to be able to. And I always was thinking some little kid come out there and think, oh my, what fun, and get in there and drown. But they didn't pay any attention to it, and nobody did, so I guess it's all
It
right.
must still be there.
It's there someplace, it moves.
Oh.
And,
So when you say he put a pipe down, he was out in the lake.
no, on the shore.
He was on the shore.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And he put a pipe down, and every spring he'd go down and put the pipe down, and this was noted as the cold springs. And
Neat. When did the McMillan School, all those buildings come to be?
oh, let's see. Was I still in school? Yeah, when I was about 16, so about 39, or about 38, somewhere around in there.
So were those buildings built by CCC?
Yeah. Well, maybe, I don't remember. That was a Spike building.
What does that mean?
Well, they had this perfect one at Pigeon River. And somehow Spike Sayre, who was something to do with this, got mad at somebody. So they built this one.
Is
And-
that just somebody's name?
No,
Spike,
McMillan,
what did you say?
yeah, what does he?
No, but what did you say, Spike?
Sayre.
There, what's that?
Oh, he was
That was the person's name. then.
he was something to do with Lansing. And they had this perfect one at Pigeon River. But because somebody got mad at somebody else, they built this, and I think they finally, the one at Pigeon River went poof. See, that's how the state operates. I used to make Louise Hannah mad. I'd say, it isn't what you know, Louise, it's who you know in the state. And she just, because her husband was worked for the conservation in town, and she'd get so mad at me. And we all worked in the nursery in the spring and the fall counting trees.
Oh, were you paid, or did you have
Oh
to
yeah,
volunteer?
no, we paid. We're paid, yeah.
Your
Mhm.
sisters did that too? when you were
Mhm.
gone?
My one sister did, not the other sister, but when Nancy was there, the CCs were still there, and then she got married and moved away. My sister was married when she worked there too, but my mother worked there also, and he counted trees no matter how cold it was, and no wonder I got arthritis in my hand.
So you were packaging them up to be sent
Yeah,
wherever they were going.
Yeah, we packaged them in hundreds, you know, and then they take them in the cone roaster, or not the cone roaster, the shed there, and it's there, and they package them in metal things, you know, they're, maybe they're metal with wood handles on, or wood pieces on each, and the trees would go in there, and then they'd send them by truck someplace. The trucks from the other forestries would come and get them. And
How many different kinds of pines did they do? They do all pine trees?
hmm I don't remember. I just remember counting those bloody things. And then in the spring, of course, before they got old enough to count, we'd go around hunting grubs, because they'd eat and you knew where the grub was because all of a sudden there was no pine trees in the row. So you had a metal thing about this long with a point
About
on it.
12 inches?
Yeah, and you'd stick it down in the ground and grab the grub
No kidding.
and squash it.
Yeah.
And so that went on in the spring. And then
That
in
was a lot of manual
yeah.
labor to do that.
and then in the fall you would count the trees, the ones that had matured enough to, and they were always, seeding, reseeding, and the beds that you would have pulled out in the fall were reseeded in the spring. And so they had always had a,
So the disbursement was in the fall? Or in the spring?
no, in the fall.
After they grew all summer.
hmm
So the planting was all done in the fall?
Yes. Actually, they say it's better to do it in the fall because they get that rest in the winter and the moisture when the snow melts, but I don't know.
Well, you do too, you know a lot about this. This is great. Well, tell me about around the lake. Now, when you were a youngster, was the Lion Manor big house there?
hmm
Did you ever go there to eat or anything?
No.
No? Okay.
And Westminster was there when I was a kid.
Was that busy all summer? Did
Oh,
they have
it
people?
used to be very different than it is today. It was a regular church camp. The girls would come in June or July, I can't remember which, and the boys would come in the next month, in August. And then one week in September they had underprivileged kids. And they always had a big raft and a diving board, which we used always until 4 o'clock when they had their swimming lessons. But it was a church camp, and the kids paid to come there, of course. But that was it. They didn't take any outsiders. It was
Is it still that way?
from the Presbyterian Church, and no, I think if anybody can go there now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They have quite a hunk of lakefront, don't they?
That's leased, yeah, from the state.
Oh, is that?
The lease was signed in our dining room.
No kidding.
And, Ted Tucker was for working for the state. Somehow they tried to get that lease from Westminster, but they didn't succeed. Evidently, Westminster has more clout than the state does. They evidently had bigger. It's a big Presbyterian church in Detroit. And at one time, Reverend Fraze was the one that would, they had cottages, for the kids to sleep in the big dining hall.
But how many places are there?
I don't know anymore. I haven't been down there for years.
Oh.
And they had a tennis court, and it was regular summer camp for kids from the church.
Sure.
And now it's a summer camp, but anybody can go, I think, that wants to pay the freight.
Sure.
And
Sure. Well, let's get back to your schooling then. Did you go to grade school out here at a little country school? Or?
oh no, Mama wouldn't let me go to country school. That was too much for the baby. I started in Roscommon.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
How did you get into town?
Bus.
Oh, you had a bus already.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that
Mhm.
would have been, you would have started like in 1929.
I started when I was 7, I think, because she wouldn't let me go. There was a school, where you turn to go to Garish Park.
Yeah.
That school was on the left-hand side, that white
On that
building.
corner.
That's where my sisters went to school.
What was the name of that school?
Sims School, was it?
Oh, yeah, because Olga Gifford
Mm-hmm.
talks about that. She went there.
And they had what they called the Galloping Goose, that the Zettel kids and my sisters rode in. And it was a pickup with a frame that was canvassed in the back, so in the wintertime, and straw on the bottom, and that's how they went to school.
Who drove it?
What was his name? He
Probably
lived.
whoever owned it.
He lived on the corner, across from the school. Jimmy Dilly is all I can remember. I called him Jimmy Dilly, but I can't remember what his real name was. Anyhow, he lived there, and he drove the school bus. Whether he got paid or not, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, so by the time you started school, then your sister,
My sister was a senior
she
when.
was in high school then, so she
Yeah.
was going into Roscommon anyway.
Mhm. Yeah. See, and they built a new school, what, in 39? 31. But the first, baby, the first half of the year they went into what is the old Masonic building. High school was on the top floor, and the grade school was on the bottom floor, and we had a little building out in back.
Your little outhouse?
You didn't go to the bathroom too much in the wintertime unless you really had to, I'll tell you. And then halfway through then, the school was ready to be built, so they moved the Masonic Hall across the road.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I started to school, was there.
Okay, well, that had to be something. So you went through that whole building,
Mm-hmm.
except for your one semester in
Yep.
Lansing. Yeah, how many were in your class?
When we graduated, 18.
18? Great. Do you still have the reunion?
Yeah,
Or
we,
you go to the one?
yeah, 3 of the gals and I have lunch once a month.
Well, that's nice.
And Harold Scott, we've invited, but he never seems to make it. And of course, Jean Rutledge and Shirley Kiley live out west, so they don't. We had a reunion for our 50th. And
They came for that.
yeah, and
So who are
but
the three girls that you see?
Marge Cisco Feldhauser, or Roper, excuse me, and Jean Fowler Feldhauser, and Martha uh, Jansen Roper, or Austin. Her dad used to have something to do with the Mason building in through there. So did Jean's first husband. And we have lunch once a month.
Well, that's nice.
And we talk for a couple hours.
That would be a group to interview, wouldn't it?
Yeah. We talk about sending poor Martha out snipe hunting one time for a party. And when I stopped to think of it, though, I was a brat in high school. I really was.
When the war was on, what did that have effect on your schooling, do you think? It had
And
any effect?
at that time, none, really.
Did-
Except that I wrote to a bunch of servicemen, like Moreland Dutton and Jack Price and a kid by the name of Sullivan. And I probably wrote to 6 or 7 servicemen once a week.
Well, that's
But other
something.
than that, that was the only.
How many of the ones that graduated with you went into the
We lost
war
one
then?
kid over the channel, Bill Gardner. And I don't know if the rest of them went into the service or not. You know, after you graduate and I moved away, you kind of lost track of everybody.
So when did you came back and when did you start to date Earl then?
Oh, let's see. We were married
Were
in
you- Were
47.
you a good student of his when you were, no?
He says, he always said that if it hadn't been for Dorothy Pavick and Kenny Ostling, I probably wouldn't have passed chemistry.
They helped you along, huh?
Dorothy and I were the only two in biology, though, that would cut frogs and do anything like that. The boys
What-
wouldn't.
What would they do? They refused to do it?
Yeah, and that was all right. Nobody made them do it.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Who was the biology teacher?
Who was that at that time? Shear? Who was it? Because Earl didn't come till I was a senior in high school.
Was he right out of college then? Was
No, he
his
taught
first
3
job?
years in Henderson, Minnesota.
Oh.
And he was a football coach in
How did he
Henderson.
hear about Roscommon? How did he happen to come?
Our superintendent was scouting for teachers.
Who was the superintendent?
Champion, EL champion. And Earl always said that when he got off the bus, if it hadn't pulled away, he'd have gotten right back on again. Because in those days, he got off at what is the office impact now, is the Ford Garage. And the streets weren't paved or anything. And it was a windy day, and the dust was a-flying. There wasn't a car on the street, you know.
Wow.
Because
That
until,
was in 41.
yeah, until the advent of snowmobiles and skiing, after Labor Day, the town died except for hunting season. I can remember the hunting season of 41. You couldn't walk, you couldn't drive a car down the street. It was packed with people.
No kidding.
Yeah, they had the Blue Ox and all of that.
Well,
We used,
tell me about the Blue Ox. I've heard people refer to it, but I don't really know what to.
well, Paul Bunyan.
Right, but did somebody actually have a statue? Did they
Let's see,
make
did,
a wooden thing, or what?
did we have, I don't know. But it seems like we did, but I can't remember for sure. I was too busy having fun with the hunters.
With all those guys.
Well, you know, in those days, the young kids came hunting. Now, the older, well, they were young. Like me, they've grown older. But in those days, kids,
It was a young crowd.
yeah, like 20-year-olds, real young crowd. And they'd have a dance at the school, we called it the Hunter's Ball, and had an orchestra. No jukebox, an orchestra.
Live music.
Hmm. And that was your
Was
livelihood.
that a dress-up thing, or
Oh,
were
no.
they in their hunting clothes?
They had their hunting clothes, and you dressed in a skirt and sweater or something. And that was their livelihood, anybody that had a business, until spring. if you didn't make it in hunting season, you just kind of went broke. I always felt sorry for Bill Wagner when he bought the hardware store, because he bought it like in the fall. And of course, there was hardly any business. I don't know how he made it that first winter. I don't, because in those days, you didn't, as I said,
There was nothing going.
no, nothing going.
So do you remember when they paved the street?
No, I can't remember that. It was just, they paved them one time. I don't know if it was when I was gone.
So you came back, so you were down there we left you in Ypsilanti.
See, and I came back, let's see.
When the war ended, you figured, in 45.
No, 46. Butch was born in 45.
So what year did you marry? Did you and Earl get married?
47. See, Butch and Dave were not Earl's. I had 2 boys before we were married.
Oh, okay.
And, but he adopted them, so and they were only like 2 and 3.
So you were born in 44 and 45?
45 and 46.
Okay.
And then Glenn was born in 52. Glenn was Earl's.
Okay, so you came back here.
Butch was born? Yeah, Butch was born. And I came back, and that's when my mother came back to help me with the kids.
Oh, okay.
Then I went down to Lansing and got a job. And Mother stayed and took care of the kids.
Oh, what kind of job?
I worked in the auto owners filing. Oh, I hate filing to this day. And then I worked at the school one year, the high school in the office. When I came home, Bill Ingleson got me the job at the office.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
Was he teaching there then?
Mm-hmm. And then in 47, of course, Earl and I got married, so I didn't work.
You got married here then?
Yeah. We were married in the Congregational Church when it was the Stone Church. Oh. And our reception was in the Spruce Lodge.
Okay, isn't that great?
And they had the...
There was a dining room.
Yeah, uh-huh. That's where our reception was.
Well, how nice. That was a wonderful event.
Yeah, oh yeah. And let's see, a guy by the name of Carl Nash stood up. It was Earl's best man. Walked in the church and he looked around and he said, well, it hadn't fallen down yet. This is the first time I've been in here since Carl Carlson's funeral. But that was the way Carl was. He was a character. And Thelma Dutton was my matron of honor.
Okay. Was she married to Moreland by then?
No, she wasn't married. That was a good year. That was a good year. I got married. Thelma got married. Ella Logan got married. And somebody else who had been either widowed or divorced got married that year.
Well, nice.
So, no, Thelma was divorced. And she and Marilyn got married that year, but I don't remember when.
Were you married in summer?
Yeah, June.
Well, how nice. So then you've been here ever since, huh?
Been here since, well, when my father died, I was 16, and my mother built this house, and I lived in here until I went to Lansing for that thing, and then I came home. And
so then when you and Earl were married, did you move, is this what the house that you lived in?
Yeah.
Because you were already here with your mom and your 2 boys.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll never forget. I was working, and so Mother was watching the 2 kids, and so Earl built a great big pen out there for them to play in,
Mm-hmm.
God, it was all really a big one. They wouldn't play in it. They stood at the gate and cried all the time. Finally, we took it down.
Bless your little heart.
Oh, they were pistols. Oh, God. They were pistols.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
And, of course, Grandma spoiled them, like all grandmas do.
Sure. So she lived here with you until she died
Yeah.
in 88.
Mm-hmm.
What year did Earl die?
95.
95. So you only had 7 years here by
Mm-hmm.
yourselves. You're too newlyweds.
But then he was,
He was
he
not
had
well.
senile dementia the
Yeah.
last 5, 6 years, somewhere around in there. And actually, the last year was the year that he was, but he was no trouble. Everybody said, "Oh," I said, "Hey, if he'd have been that quiet when he was in his before he got sick, I'd have been all set."
Yeah.
He was so easy to take care of that no matter what
That
I,
was good.
no matter what I told him to do, he'd do.
Mm-hmm.
And the worst thing was he had such poor circulation in his legs. If he didn't keep them up, his legs would get almost black. And he always had a quilt around his legs because he was cold. And so he'd get up and he wouldn't take the quilt away and he'd fall down. So I'd take a chair over to him and he'd help himself up too. I'd help him and I'd be cussing and swearing at him and he'd be laughing at me. So, he was so easy to take care
Well,
of.
that's good. All the years that he was teaching, then did you work?
I
I
worked for Corky for, 17 years.
Oh, did you?
Hmm. I quit in 56 because I knew my mother was to the point where I was going to have to start taking care of her.
You didn't help.
And because she would fall down, she'd lose her balance. And I understand it because I do the same thing now. And the doctor says it's one of the things that comes with age that you. And all the time she fell down, she never hurt herself. She'd get black and blue, but one time she fell outside and hit her wrist on the side of the sidewalk and got a real hairline fracture in her wrist. But other than that,
So she did well.
yeah.
So when you were growing up out here, how often did you go into the village? Did you go always to Roscommon to get supplies, or did you
Grayling.
go to Grayling?
The A&P store in Grayling.
What kind of car did your father have?
Oldsmobile, always.
Did he buy them new?
Mm-hmm, from a man in Ernie Moore in Bay City.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Well, and
Did
then,
you ever take the train down back and
no,
forth?
yeah, a couple of times, and we stayed at, oh shoot, what's the name of that hotel? Anyhow, they had a big Negro chef, and I was fascinated by him. I don't know how old I was, just old enough to remember him.
Mm-hmm.
And he made a big fuss over me
At the hotel?
at the hotel because I had, curls.
Mm-hmm.
When I was little, I had curls.
Were you going to basically to visit people? Or
Chicken
what?
show. My dad
Chicken
raised
show.
chickens
Oh, tell
to
us
show.
about that.
Yeah, and he had partridge Plymouth Rocks, and he'd take the roosters mostly, and he'd got cups someplace for prizes.
Oh, for
And we were
heaven's sake.
friends with Schaefer's, who owned the cottage next door here to us.
Mhm.
And Mr. Schaefer, the old man, and so he raised chickens too. And we were friends with some people by the name of Jarman, so we'd go down and we stayed at the hotel. And I can't remember going to the chicken show, but I must have, but I don't remember.
So while
but
he was in charge of Forest Day University and all that, he was raising chickens.
uh-huh, yeah, we
on
always
his
had,
own.
yeah. I remember,
Did you sell the eggs?
no, we always used them for,
Oh,
he
well,
didn't
you were
have that
cooking
many
for all those
chickens.
people.
Hmm?
You were cooking for all those men, too.
Well,
All
yeah,
those-
but he didn't have that many chickens. He had just had, I don't know, maybe a dozen or two somewhere around, not enough but the roosters were his pride and joy because I don't know if you've ever seen a partridge Plymouth Rock rooster, but they have, I call them iridescent tail feathers.
Oh.
They're like blue, black,
Were they just running loose in the
Oh yeah,
garden?
oh yeah, but they were up on the hill. The chicken coop was on the hill up here.
Mhm.
So they didn't usually get down into the yard. And then at one time he fenced it in. He had some by the garage, but that was fenced, and he had this little banty rooster. This friend of his in Bay City gave him, and that banty rooster would fly at him every time he came into the pen. But he always wore high-top laced leather boots, so the rooster never hurt him, but he would fly at him every time he walked in that pen. But I remember Don Lance, he got so mad at Don Lance Lance's lived next door to Zettles at one time for a while. And Don was quite a fisherman, and he tied his own flies. And he took some of the tail feathers from one of my dad's roosters.
He was in trouble.
And we had a dog that just hated Don, and we've never had an ugly dog except for this one. And she hated Don, and she'd chase him out of the yard every time he came in.
Isn't that fun? Those are fun memories. Though.
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
But we always shopped in Grayling.
did you?
Uh-huh.
Now, did you continue being part of the First Congregational Congregation?
Mm-mm.
Church
You
there?
didn't have to go to church then to
No.
be married there.
You just were
Uh-huh.
married there, but you weren't really.
I can't even remember who the minister was. Isn't that terrible?
Oh, that's all right. Do you remember going to did you go to town to go to the theater or anything like that when you were growing up?
I went to Grayling.
To Grayling?
Hmm. I don't think they had one at that time.
Okay.
Actually, we didn't do much in Roscommon until after I was growing, and graduated from school. When I was going to school, of course, I was there.
What kind of activities, with school activities, were available to you?
Oh, I was a cheerleader, and we played intramural basketball.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and we went, of course, all to all the track meets and the games, and then where the gym is now in the middle school, they had a skating rink.
Oh,
And
outdoor skating.
An outdoor skating rink. So we used to skate in the winter time and play tennis in the summer because they had tennis courts there.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the Delma house sitting on the corner there yet?
No, I can't remember sitting. I can remember.
The
Yeah,
view?
where the garage is, where the. No, that wasn't that. That was the one that's back there.
It would have been on that front corner, if I understand correctly, where it was. Like kind of across from the Kearney house.
Yeah, that's right. Because the Masonic Hall set back here, and the Gilmer House set up here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, by the time you went to school there, it probably was no longer a boarding house. It was
No,
only a boarding house for 31. Did you have any classes in that building?
Gilmore House?
Uh-huh. No.
Just in Masonic Hall. Edith and Barbara lived there when I went to school.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. What was his name?
Byron.
Byron Barber. Yeah, they lived there when I went to school.
Well, that was good. Well, I'm trying to think what else I wanted to ask you about.
And of course, the post office was on the corner where the Nancy's got her
Radio shop.
radio shop.
So your family bought groceries in Grayling, so were you familiar with all the stores in town?
Yeah, where right by the railroad tracks that used to be Chase's store. This side of the river, it's boarded up. It's not being used now. Soapsack lived upstairs.
Right. That was Chase's.
That was Chase's, and they used to buy bubble gum in there until my mother told them to stop selling me bubble gum because it would make my mouth all,
Uh-huh.
And then the telephone office was that little building between between the dollar store and Chase's. That was the
Oh.
telephone office.
Oh, okay.
And the operators used to stay there at night. And then McConkey's, of course, has always been McConkey's as far as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, what was that next building? And at one time, the A&P store was where
Where Dan Fisher was.
Fischel is. And at one time, the Masonic Lodge was upstairs in that building, and it was called Sly's. It was a grocery store before the A&P. It was an old store. The A&P store built a new brick building. It was a
It was a wood building.
wood building before that. It was Sly's.
2 stories.
2 stories, and the Masonic Lodge was upstairs.
Oh, now, no, I don't remember anyone saying that before.
And of course, over where the, I can't ever think of them, Knights of Columbus, I call them.
What's that, Vincent's?
Yeah, St. Vincent's is, that was, they used to play basketball in that old store on the upstairs.
Yeah, that was the Opera House. They said
Yeah.
that burned in 29.
And,
Remember that burning?
mm-mm,
That would have been when you first
Yeah.
started to go to school there, or even before you started to go to school there.
I think Andy Price was at the Opera
On the
House.
bottom. His store was on the bottom.
Yeah,
Opera
and
House was on the second
they used to
floor.
play basketball up there, and well, and then they used to go by train to Grayling to play basketball, to practice even. And
So when Earl came here, was he a coach right away?
he had football. Well, in those days, you had everything. You had football, basketball, track, and everything when he first came here.
Baseball too?
Yeah. When he came from the service, then he helped with football. They had a football coach when he came from the service. And he had baseball and track, I
Did he
believe,
come from the service?
back here.
When did he go in?
He went in, he was gone 3 years. He came back in 47, let's subtract. He went in 44, 45, 44. From school, he was drafted from school.
Oh, okay.
And he was in 3 years, and then when he came back too.
Then he got married.
And,
So what year had he come here? Oh, when you were a senior, you said he came.
mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that is that is good.
So he came in 41, and then back in 46.
Okay, back to, your father died, and you were just 16.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever happened to your Uncle Michael then? Did he live here till he was an older man?
Oh, yeah, he lived until he was 94. They moved, he and my aunt, it got to the point that I put a telephone in for him. They wouldn't use it. My aunt fell, was it my uncle or my aunt fell? And the neighbor found him. Ivan Willett was their neighbor. He found him. But they wouldn't use the telephone, so I had it taken out. And it got so Uncle Mike wouldn't drive anymore. He was smart. He gave up driving on his own because he couldn't see well enough. And so it got to the point where we knew they couldn't take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if Mother had probably could have moved in with them and helped them, but we moved them over here. They lived with us for, geez, I don't know.
Both of them?
Mm-hmm.
What was his wife's name?
No, it was his sister,
Oh, his
Mary.
sister.
Uh-huh.
Oh, your Uncle Michael, was he not married?
No. My aunt had been married, but nobody knew her. They always knew her by Mary Wargle, and it was Mary Greacher was actually her name. Her husband was killed after they'd been married a couple of years. He was something in a factory, and he fell, and so she was only married a couple of years.
Okay, so your mother had a brother Michael and a sister Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Were there more children?
There was another brother, and I can't think of what his name was, but he was sick, and he died when he was only 40-something. And there was another sister, Anna, and she never came with them. She stayed in Ohio.
Okay. So
And I don't know what
probably had a
happened.
family there.
I don't know what happened to her. I know we had a cousin called Millie, but other than that, I don't.
So there were actually 5 children in your mother's family.
Yeah, evidently. Yeah, that's right.
Anna,
Uh-huh.
Mary,
Yeah, and my mother and the 2 boys,
and
yeah.
Michael, and the other brother.
Mhm.
So which Michael died at age 94, your grandfather or your uncle?
My uncle.
Okay.
I don't know how old my grandfather was. I could go out to the grave and look
So where are they buried?
in the old part of the cemetery.
Which,
Roscommon.
Higgins,
In
the
Higgins.
one in town?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Aunt Mary and Uncle Mike are out in Higgins, or Garish Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
But the rest of
Are
them,
your
my,
grandparents, where are they buried?
I don't know where my grandmother's buried, frankly.
Oh, where's your grandfather buried?
He's buried out there
In
in Roscommon.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother and dad are buried there.
What did your grandfather do when he was not able to make a living with that farming when they came here to homestead?
Well, I guess they struggled. And, I really don't know what he did.
Oh, okay.
I know my Uncle Mike worked in the WPA, but that was in later years.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, they probably did anything they could to.
Did you say your mother was how old when she came here?
Well, I would.
Did she go to school here at all?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay. That's okay. I just was wondering if she would have gone to a country school up there.
No, that's something you don't even think about as
Yeah.
growing up, and they're there. And
Sure.
the only reason I know how they got here was because I heard, they were cussing out Les Helen all the time.
I imagine they were.
Because of this.
I wonder what they paid that guy for all that land.
Oh.
How did he acquire it?
I really don't know if he bought it up on tax sale or what.
Oh.
But he was a wheeler and a dealer, that was for sure.
Did they meet him personally? Did he come here often?
Well, I don't know. I've met Les. I met his son. But I don't remember if I ever met the old Les or not. Probably did, because I heard my dad cuss him out and often.
Oh my gosh, isn't that something? Well, I think you've given us a good feel for what it was like to grow up in this area.
Oh, it was beautiful.
Yeah.
It was just gorgeous to grow up in this area.
Then did you feel bad when the state park kept becoming larger and larger and more people came, or did it just kind of happen?
It's a nice park. It's a family park. If it had been like the South Unit State Park, I might have felt worse.
Mm-hmm.
But this has always been sort of a family-oriented park, and the people don't give you any trouble. Except two or 3 years in a row, we had a bunch of kids camp over there, and their radios were going night and day. And they were really, well, I call them hippies, They were really, and the beer cans were stacked up like this. I was afraid to go to the lake and walk by their camp, really. And the last year they were here, they chased a gal bare naked through the park and up through by the fire lane up by Westminster there, and they had all the sheriff's departments and the state police and everybody here, and they never came back. Earl always figured it was college kids at the end of the college year that got together, but they never came back. Of course, I'm sure they were told they couldn't come back. But this is, other than that, this has always been I kind of hate to see it, that you can't park on the lake shore anymore. And I hate it that you can't get to the water half of the time for walking over people. And so I don't even go swimming. I wasn't swimming last year at all.
That's the first year you didn't swim?
Yeah, because you go down and you're dodging a frisbee or a ball or something all the time, because the designated swimming area is closed off, but it's so full of people. And then those darn road runners come so close to the boys that you wonder sometimes they're going to, that they're going to come through. So it's no fun to swim it anymore. You used to be able to go leisurely swim and not worry about getting hit there, and all you hear is the motors and the lake. The DNR is letting these big boats on the lake, and they shouldn't. They belong on the Great Lakes, not on Higgins Lake. They're ruining Higgins Lake, and I don't know why they're allowing them to do it. but they are, and they're ruining Higgins Lake.
I agree.
It's still a beautiful lake, but you know what's going to happen in a number, 100 years from now. It may not be. I'm glad Lyon Township has gotten some people to pick up their garbage. I understand it isn't as bad this year as it has been. And
Are you in Lyon Township?
no, we're in
You're-
Crawford County,
Beaver.
Beaver Creek. Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's all right. But you're in our school district then.
Mhm.
That's good.
We voted to have. For years, we went to Roscommon, and nobody ever said anything. And then Emma T. Wiseman,
To vote, you mean? You went to Roscommon to vote?
no, to school.
Oh, to school.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and we belonged to Beaver Creek. They had a school, and we should have gone to that country school. After high school, you could choose whichever one you wanted because Beaver Creek didn't have a high school. But while you were in grade school, you had to go to this Beaver Creek out here. Well, old Emma T. Wiseman discovered that we weren't in the district, so we were supposed to pay tuition. Well, I don't know how Holtz and Earl worked it out somehow, but and then so we voted. My mother and my sister were 2/3 of the landowners, and that's all they had to have to petition Crawford County to annex us to Garish Higgins.
Oh.
And then why they didn't do the upper 40 at that time, I have no idea. But they only did the lower 40. Of course, there was nobody at that time on the upper 40. And then when Glenn got married and built his house up there, and they had Trevor, we had to petition to do that, and we didn't have any problems with it. But they kept charging us, what was it? How we discovered something. They didn't put us in Garish Higgins School District for years. The tax people kept us in Crawford County.
Uh-huh.
And just before we got to go on vacation one time, they called and said something about we owed an additional amount of money because, and Earl said, well, check at the school. Polly will show you. Well, we had a hard time getting it straightened out. We finally got it straightened out. But for years, they still had us in Crawford County.
School district.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, anything else that you remember from the village, or? I think you gave us a good history of this area and what your father did here.
Yeah.
How long did that nursery, was that active then after your father died?
Oh, let's see. Ed was there for quite a while. Vorgy was. Probably. I would think maybe 10 years, because Brigham's were at the nursery after Ed retired. Paul Brigham.
Was that Byron's father?
Mm-hmm. And they were different.
Well, they were still state employees, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the state just finally decided there was no longer a need for all that, or do you know how that?
I don't know. Well, they quit reforestation mostly. You know, the forestries.
They completed what they wanted.
Yeah, the forestries most of them had shut down by then. And when the people retired, they never replaced them. And so I don't think the nursery shipped a few trees after that, but not on the scale that they used to.
And they always were just for our state. They never shipped
No.
out of state.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Well, that is very interesting.
They were just for our own foresters, or
So, from your mother and dad, actually, with Betty's children, there's still quite a few in the area.
Yeah, see, I have a niece, two nieces that live on King Road. Carolyn, when Bob died, sold their place, and so I gave her a couple of acres, and she put modular or whatever you call those things on it.
Oh.
And my other niece lives in one of the houses that my brother-in-law built
Uh-huh.
that they didn't sell. And of course my son lives up on the hill. And I have a niece that lives over on Fletcher Road.
So you
Military
have-
Road, excuse me, and her 2 kids live over there too.
So there's actually, from your grandpa and grandma Wargo that came, you're down to the 5th generation of people here now. Because then it would be your mother, and then you, and their children, and they have grandchildren
Mhm.
that are here.
Yeah.
Oh, great. That's great. See, you're just an integral part of our
Oh yeah.
community.
Yeah. I walk down the streets of Roscommon and I think, what town am I in? Because I don't know anybody. I go to Traverse City, I see more people I know than I do in Roscommon.
Yeah.
It's,
All that happens.
it really is.
There's a lot of new people here. That's why it's important that we try and get the history of some of this, because
I-
few of us know
Yeah.
how that all came about.
Well, see, there used to be a gas station on the corner where the eating place is now.
Subway.
Subway before, and then Arv's Market was there. And there was a hardware store that burned where Bradley's.
Bradley is.
And then the A&P store was there at one time. There was a barber shop there. And Bombs, of course, has always been there.
Yeah.
It was a doctor's office at one time. And he
Sidney Soderholm gave us a nice history of that.
Did
Third
she?
State.
and he committed suicide in there. And I don't know, you could still see the bullet hole for a long time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
In
And
the ceiling or what?
yeah, in the, yeah.
In the wall.
Mm-hmm. And he was a drunkard is what he was.
Mhm.
And
Well, I think you've done very well. You,
I can remember our buses had one seat down the middle, you know.
oh, and then you faced the outside.
And no,
inside.
then you had seats along the edge, or along the side like you do now, but there was one seat just down the middle that didn't have any backs or anything on it.
Oh, just a bench like.
Just like bench, uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
We used to, Elmer Soderholm was our bus driver, and when we got to his house, there were just a few Zettel kids and Ann Carlson and Lillian Johnson left on the bus, and myself. And every once in a while, he'd stop at his house, and his mother would have just baked cinnamon rolls.
Oh, my goodness.
And
Now, that would never happen today.
no, and we'd have
You'd
coffee.
have a treat.
We'd have coffee and cinnamon rolls,
Oh, isn't that neat?
and
That's the house that Mike and Sue Glover had now,
Mhm.
what you're talking about.
hmm
Well, that's great. Well, and you certainly enjoyed, did you swim most every day? when you
Oh,
were growing
Lord,
up?
I was out at 9 o'clock in the morning and come home maybe for lunch and then go back again. We used to dive off in the Westminster's, the lower one, not the top one. I went off on that once, and that was enough for me.
That you were a good swimmer.
Not really. I never learned to swim correctly. Up here, you just learn. When I learned to swim, we had a raft out here ourselves. And I jumped off in the raft, and Mother and Ed Zettel were out there, and I dog paddled to them. And that's how I learned to swim. But we'd swim from the high dive to the raft, and then back, and then we'd dive off in the raft, and then back to the high dive. And we were out there all day long. Then when Westminster came out at 4, we had to leave, of course. So then we'd go home. But other than that, I spent most of my summers at the lake.
Wow. Did your father fish much?
Yeah, he was a fisherman. He was an ice fisherman, and then in those days you could spear with a boat, you know. And what did they use? Kerosene for the lamp or something. And he speared a big pike like this at one time. And yeah, he was a fisherman, and that was when you could get perch and
So you ate fish fairly often?
yeah, perch, uh-huh, yeah.
Did he hunt too? Did he hunt the deer?
No, never hunted, No. Rabbits and fox, but never deer.
Then, did you know many people, like over by Lion Manor, did you know any of those families that lived there?
High slips and,
Well, tell me about the high school.
well, let's see. How many were there? I can't remember now.
Well, John, that book that was written, that Beulah Land book about that Bessie was a high school that married Mr. Kellogg.
Oh, well, see, I guess I
Have you
just
read
knew
that
the
book?
name maybe. No, I haven't.
Oh, you can enjoy it.
And, what was the guy's name that,
It was John. One of the brothers she talked about was John Haight.
oh, I'm trying to think of who was the one, Otto Decker, yeah, that owned the store at one time, there, that
At
store.
Lion Manor.
At Lion Manor. And I can remember we used to have dances every Saturday night over at the school, which was the township hall or something. And Roy Frazier played the drums. Somebody else played the fiddle. Otto Detter played the fiddle. And I forget who played the piano.
Well, that had to be fun.
It was.
Did your mother and dad, everybody went?
Oh, yeah. We used to have dances at our house in the big dining room, too. Mrs. Zuttle used to play the piano, and some guy from Frederick played the drums, and somebody else played the fiddle. Well, my dad made home brew. And if you could still walk down the basement stairs after you had the home brew, because that's where he kept it, then he'd put more sugar in it. And he always made ginger ale and root beer for us.